if you're like me, you like to paint things that have some significance to your life. So recently, one of my neighbors in a very suburban neighborhood got a rooster. So every morning we hear the cock-a-doodle-doo. And so I thought, well, come on, I gotta paint a rooster. So to get started, I'm putting down some clean water on the background. And while I'm not going to try to replicate the reference photo exactly, I do want to get the feeling of there's some sort of foliage going on. So I'm just splattering some greens. I'm going to do a combination of greens and a little bit of warmth in the background, just to create an abstract setting for us to work from. And once I get that down, I'll go ahead and let it soak in and dry a little bit before I get started. I'm just using a little eyedropper here to put in a little more robust amount of paint to get a little bit of warmth. And then I'm just moving the paper around to get that pour effect. So now that it's dried a little bit, I'm ready to get going. So I know that it's still a little damp, so I'm going to get a little spread, but I do like that that integrates the subject to the background, so I don't mind a little bit of that spray. You just have to be mindful about not doing too much because it'll get kind of out of control. So I have switched to a smaller brush just so that I have a little more control over these tight areas. And I'm just doing layer one, so I'm not trying to get all of the details and show the values and dimensions. I'm just trying to kind of set the stage. And I'll do the same thing for the beak. So add in an eye. You can just do a small circle. He really doesn't have a lot of detail on his eye. And then go ahead and start those tail feathers and use a bigger brush, a brush that replicates the size of the feathers, and that'll allow you to stay loose and just follow the direction. You can use the tip of the brush to get a smaller feather shape, and then use the belly of the brush to get it to be a little bit wider. And I'm just using the raw sienna light here, and I'll go back in and add the rusty color to allow it to spread while this raw sienna light is still damp. And while I'm not trying to get too detailed, I am trying to give it some texture to show that there are some small feathers mixed in with some longer feathers and that they all follow the contour of the rooster. And then I'm just getting those darker tail feathers in. And I'm trying to stay painterly. I'm really not trying to be realistic as usual. We want this nice, loose style. While paint's wet, you can charge in other colors and allow them to kind of mix and mingle, which will add to the overall effect. And then, remembering it's layer one, just go in lightly, start to form things, and then you can add more specific details as they dry. And here you can see how the paint is able to blend and spread because the under painting is still damp. And try to get a variety of brush marks using different size brushes and having more or less paint on your brush. You get that dry brush effect or a very wet stroke, depending on the texture you're looking for. And here I'm just varying my colors across to try to begin to show some of the shadows. Again, we're not trying to draw each feather, but we are trying to show that there is a change, a shift in value. And we're building on that effect. So layer one is very flat, and then each layer, consequent layer we add on top, it starts to add more and more dimension. And we'll build on that eye since we just kind of had that spot to begin with, and now we'll blend it in so that it becomes a cohesive shape. So for our second layer, I've added a little bit of the Bloodstone Genuine to it to deepen it, and then we can start to build on our value story. Now we can go on top and clean up the edges to get a sharper line where we want them. And now that it's dry, we don't have to worry about it spreading. Don't forget to leave a little bit of texture that you can see in the reference photo. And then use those deeper tones to try to get more and more dimension. And now he needs to be grounded, and so I'm setting him on this branch, and I'll start with a dark edge, and then I'll just use water to have it blend in to create that contoured roundedness. And he's really not popping off the background enough, and so I'm going to go into mine, and I'm going to go ahead and add another layer of green, dark green, but I'm making sure to blend in the edges seamlessly so it kind of dissipates into our abstract background. And the darkness is going to make him pop off better. So it's not, you don't look across and think he just gets lost in just the sea of noise. There's a little more intention behind the background. And you can just pick a few select areas that will enhance that. And you can see my brush strokes are very deliberate. I can define more feathers on the edges. I can use the big brush to blend it out by adding more water. And that way we get those nice layers that are underneath, but we still get the effect of the darker background behind. So at this point, keep looking across your reference photo and your composition to decide where you need those darkest darks. And that's really going to make things pop and bring it home. And you can go on top of your initial layers with the same color, so in this case the yellow, just to give it a little more vibrancy. And that will also add more dimension. This technique is called glazing. And you can blend in other colors at the same time because it's essentially a wet on wet technique. So you'll get a nice natural transition. And vary your brush marks. It always adds a lot of interest and energy to your piece if you make quick strokes and then longer, slower strokes, and strokes that are more like calligraphy, and others that are more washy. And this is kind of where your style comes into play. What feels natural to you, and go ahead and be confident and make those marks. I can tell here that I've kind of lost the beak a little bit. So I'll have to do some work at the end. I'll show you how I'm going to fix that. We could have masked off that area. That would have been a nice technique just to preserve the lightness of it, because I think that would have been a nice highlight. But since I didn't do that, I'll show you what I'm going to do. And here still I'm adding more and more of those dark dimensions, or darker pigments, just so that I can get a full value story and represent everything. And his feet clearly needed a little more room. It was just the first wash that was there. So I'm going in and blending in some of the browns. Still feel like the background wasn't deep enough to have him pop. So again, you can just layer as many times as you want, as long as it's dry or damp without worrying about ruining that background. And then blend it out as always. Still needed a little more dark green here to make that pop off. And I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit below the branch as well. But overall, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm going to go and do a little bit of that work on the beak that I mentioned. So I'm added some white gouache, but I'm adding the raw sienna light to it. So essentially we're getting an opaque yellow, and that'll allow me to go over the background and cover up what I didn't want. And I can use a little bit of that lighter, the whitish part of the gouache to grab the highlight at the end of the beak there. So it's looking pretty good overall. I'll just add a couple more splatters to pick up some of the light that would be hitting the foliage in the background. But I really appreciate you watching today. I hope you had fun if you painted along. And I hope you'll let me know what else you'd like to see. Until next time, happy painting.